It is Mrs. Johnson. I came right back. This is take two because I got totally derailed on my introduction. Uh, Jamie Johnson, Mrs. Johnson. Call me Mrs. Johnson if you're my student. Um, I don't know what that was. Um, let's see. With the Agro Wisdom channel. We're reading uh Cattle Country of Peter French by Giles French. We're on the introduction. We just like peeked around the book and read like the back and shit. Um, I got my snacks, Cheetos still. Got my cozy little guy who's gonna read a book with me. I love stuffed animals. I have a lot of them at home. Um, and my cozy blankets. Oh, and my hot chocolate. I will actually show you my hot chocolate this time. I got this cup from graduating Chico State. Very good cup. I worked hard for that cup. Really hard. 2 years worth of work. Four, if you count FRC. Anyway, okay, back to introductions. Or back to chapter one's introduction. Thanks. Oh, this book isn't bad. It's like 150 pages. We've got this. We'll finish it in like a while. I don't know. Okay, introduction. This book is about cattleman Peter French and his contemporaries who developed the great stock ranches in southeastern Oregon in the late 19th century. It has been compiled from the records with an attempt to discard the extravagant yarns that have been told and written about these men in the Old West. They were not heroes or demons. They qualified for neither role. The popular depiction of them is a distorted one. The way they actually lived, the work they did, and the equipment they used all should be part of our history, not just our romantic dreams. A rider on a cow ranch was a working man. He was hired for his skills. The life he led was hard and sometimes dramatic, but in his day it was no more touched with glamour than pitching hay, which he sometimes did. Those riders were people, not gods on horseback, and they faced the same personal problems as their grandsons, who now daily head for shop or office. French himself was a person with a strong and very definite character traits, some of them laudable. I don't know what that means. Some merely human. He ruled a domain as large as some states, while he developed his vast cattle empire in Blitzen Valley. To this work and to the glens he gave his life. Although of the same name as my own, Peter French was not a relative. He was of the southern branch of the family. The writer came from Vermont. The reason for this book about him is that it seemed time to portray him as a man, how he met his problems, and the forces that brought him down. No one can write a book of history without the aid of great many persons and much research. Almost every courthouse where records might be found about Peter French has been visited. State historical societies have been consulted. Librarians, the kindest of women, have been unfailingly helpful. Leo McCoy of Red Bluff was an inestimable aid to all those who gave advice and encouragement, who dug information from old files, who answered inquiring letters. I say thank you, Giles French. Take notes, kids. That's how you do research. You ask a bunch of people, you ask the librarians, you go beyond just Googling it. Anyway, that's my teacher tangent. Now, onto the actual book. Let's read. Ooh, look at this. Oh, God damn it. Zoom. I don't think it's working. Anyway, I might give maybe it's the lighting. I have like cozy lighting in here. Then I get all cozy and ready for bed. But I'm trying to show you all pictures. Like it's like this. Anyway, it's just Peter French's signature as it appears on an affidavit dated April 13, 1897. The month he reached 48 and the year he was murdered. Murdered. There's scandal in this book. Let's read it. This is gonna be a good story time book. Good bedtime books. I know it. Okay. Anyway, let's stop being a nerd about books and bedtime stories and actually read. Cattle country. The southeastern quarter of Oregon is the romantic part of the state. I've driven through it. That's a word. Only been there once, so they'd be judging it too harshly. Here rode the men on horseback. Here moved dusty bands of cattle over sage-covered plateaus. All this makes sense. All this checks out. While the mountain peaks looked on, men fought for the land at their feet with every weapon known, from law to guns. The geography itself is dramatic. From the lakes of the Warner Valley, Hart Mountain rises at over 8,000 feet and slopes to the east. 50 miles further east, the mighty Steens catches the snows. The two ranges are like bookends in reverse position. Hart Mountain's steep side is to the west, and the Steens drop is on the east. Between is a rocky plain, decorated by Beatley's Butte and the Catlow Valley. The moisture trapped by the mountains falls on the west side of their summits, making the lake-filled Warner Valley and Donner and Blitzen Valley. That is the drainage for the Steens. East of the Steens, the Mahir and the Owehee rivers, Owhyhee, for those of you interested in how to spell that. Rivers flow to the Snake through deep canyons, and on the north, small creeks and rivers come down from the Blue Mountain Range, often flooding the Harney Basin with snow water until June. Water is an important geographic factor and the major economic resource. All the ranches are located on creeks or rivers, and the battles, actual and legal, were fought over water. You'll see a lot of that in agriculture. You've got about agriculture or water a lot. So, yeah. Anyway. To the great cattlemen goes credit for the building of thousands of miles of irrigation canals and ditches, which the smaller ranches were generally permitted to use. Harney Valley is dotted with lake beds formed by the rising cascades. Some of these lakes evaporated. Some discovered outlets. Others were choked out by volcanic dust. There are a number that contain water during the short rainy period, but many remain dry throughout the year or retain only enough moisture to become meadows in the summer months. Are those the swamps? I'm invested. I apologize if my side notes are distracting. Anyway, this is how I read things. Don't judge me. I'm reading to you, remember? Okay? doing a service in my free time. Okay, anyway, it is a land of long shadows and far off horizons, where a man can look a long way out and a long way up. There are buttes that thrust their peaks over 6,000 feet towards the sky, remnants of some unfamiliar geological formation. There is the Alvord Desert. So sorry about the names. 8 miles wide and 15 miles long, on which nothing grows, so barren and desolate that few men cross it. And there are springs that flow from the rim rock to water a few acres of early season meadow. There are lakes made acrid by alkali. Vocab right there. Acrid. Don't really know what that means. Don't know if it's a typo. Anyway. And there are miles and miles of open country covered by greasewood that shadows the sparse bunch grass. On the flats, half hidden by the stiff and stubborn sage, there are the remains of homesteader cabins, built by hopeful and misguided men, and long abandoned. It was never a country for the small landowner. Takes a lot of it for financial security. Here and there are abandoned towns, once prosperous trading centers with stores, perhaps a dance hall and a saloon, whose populations departed with the homesteaders. Blitzen, Andrews, Folly Farm, Narrows, Mule, Princeton, Albertson, and Harney are only memories. It is not an easy land to conquer, and despite the building of modern roads and adequate houses, it is doubtful if many of the present-day residents feel that it is yet to be conquered. The first white men to halt there were members of a party led by Antone Silvieli. I'm assuming that's French, and I'm assuming I mispronounced that. Sent by Peter Skeen Ogden to trap beaver along the rivers in 1826. In 1845, an emigrant train blundered through, lost and hungry, to make itself forever remembered by a story of a blue bucket and a nugget pebbled spring that has been hunted by optimists for centuries. For a century, parties of soldiers came to explore a route for an easily traveled road and to give their names to the physical features of this wide and lonely land. Later, they chased the native Indians onto reservations, preparatory to settlement by the white man, who intended to prevail in all the West. Because the grass grew tall in the meadows and on watered slopes, cattlemen focused the soldiers to range their stock on the open country that belonged to the federal government. But according to custom, it was theirs to use. They could not hoard it, nor fence it, and it was only theirs to use while they had cattle to eat the grass and proclaim possession. They were all men as rugged as the country. All first settlers have to be. Their determination was equal to the hardships. Of the four big stockmen who achieved the most prominence and made the most history, all came from California. All were backed by financiers in that state. Without available money, they could not have expanded to become the land and cattle barons that they did. You'll see a lot of that. The whole like, I'm funding you to go do this crazy thing. And also, I moved from a different state to be here. Happens. That's like westward expansion. and how states became states. Anyway, next chapter. How long is this chapter? Oh, like super short. Let's read it. Cattlemen. Foremost among these cattlemen were Peter French. I'm taking a sip of cocoa. Backed by Dr. Hugh James Glenn of Janico, Jacinto, who was a historical character in his own right. There was John Devine, whose backer was W.B. Todd Hunter of Sacramento. Henry Miller, perhaps the shrewdest of them all, had already helped develop the San Joaquin Valley in California with the aid of Charles Lux, who knew where to get money. Col- 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 colonial? That's not how you say that. Colonel. Colonel. James Hardin, with the support of Amos Riley, a storekeeper out of Santa Rosa, was an early stockman whose expansion was towards Wagentire and was out of Harney Basin. These were the big cattlemen who controlled wide tracts of meadow and hill, bought or pre-emptied springs, lived like frontier lords, and worked the clock around to increase their land and cattle, building their own glory and prestige in conjunction with the financial security of their sponsors. They were smaller operations who established themselves on ranges and remained for a few years before selling to the bigger cattlemen. Among them was William Walter Brown, Bill Brown, Wagentire Brown, whose habits were strange to his contemporaries. Although he was one of them in determination and ruggedness, he raced sheep and horses around Wagentire Mountain and northward to the Gap Ranch until the third decade of this century, so 1930, when when his herders quit, he would throw his bands of sheep together and herd them himself, staying with them for days without food, with no food but a pocket full of raisins, sometimes mixed with the strychnine he used to poison coyotes. He killed Johnny Overstreet. What are these names? Wagon Tire Overstreet? And you tell me we're not gonna make crazy stories about them? Bro, this is Wild West. Anyway, he killed Johnny Overstreet, a herder for the Double Aught Ranch, 00, of Riley and Hardin, after being threatened and fired upon. He then rode to the nearest county seat to report it, and was soon exonerated. It's weird how that works. Anyway, his worst expletive was shucks. Confound it. Oh, explorative thing he used to say all the time. This sounded weak among men who regularly called upon the saints and the deity, with a capital D, for support of the most careless statement. Brown wrote his checks on any scrap of paper, and his credit policy for the store he kept at the Gap Ranch was the delight of the indigent homesteaders. He died in a Methodist home he had long helped support in Salem. I know where Salem is. I haven't been to Salem, but I know where it is. Mind you, I've been to Oregon once so far. That's why I bought this book and why we're reading it for story time at bedtime. Anyway, Bill Haney achieved fame as a cattleman and public figure through ownership of the Belle A and the Double Ott ranches. He came to southeastern Oregon from Jacksonville when a young man, becoming manager of the P Ranch after the death of Peter French, where he continued the conservation program of the late owner. Hanley was not a permanent resident of the Harney Basin till the 1880s, after he was 30 years old. By living until 1933, he was able to revel in the glamour that came to the cattle business in the 20th century, so the 1900s. Tom Overfelt was an early stockman with headquarters on the North Fork of the Malheur River, east of the Harney Basin. He was responsible for one of the more dramatic stories that has become incorporated into Western fiction. In 1883, the federal government had abandoned the Malheur River Agency, southeastern Oregon, putting most of the land back into the public domain. The half section on which the buildings were located was put up for bid at the land office in Lakeview. Overfelt heard it was sometime after the posting of the request for bids. Heard of it sometime after the posting of the request for bids. He headed at once for the Lakeview to present Henry Miller's bullhead draft in payment. Miller's bullhead drafts were common currency wherever he operated. They were a draft on Miller and Lux, similar to drafts of the day, and ranch managers had authority to sign them. I don't know really what drafts are. Maybe like checks? I don't know. Learn how to write a check, children. It's important. Anyway, side note over. They were not written directly on a bank because Miller and Lux used several banks. They were on the firm itself, and they were always good. So they are like checks. They're like precursor checks. Sounds like. Anyway, however, the draft was refused by the land office authorities at Lakeview. Later, the land office in Washington, at the insistence of Miller, who was already backing Overfelt, ruled it a valid payment. Tales are still told of the lone horseman riding almost 3 days to reach the land office on time. Maurice Fitzgerald of Fort Harney said that he drove Overfelt to Lakeview in a buggy, which does some damage to a good story. Zoom's doing weird things with my background. That's why it's not showing you the photos. I'll figure it out later. Overfelt died in 1886, killed by a runaway horse, or as some said, was shot first by a man who was with him. Miller took over the property by paying Mrs. Overfelt for her interest. John Catlow came from England and mined in southwestern Idaho, where he made some money with which to start a ranch on the Trout Creek near John Devine's White Horse Ranch. He fenced it with lumber hauled by A. H. Robbie's 8 span of oxen from his mill on Rattlesnake Creek, 100 miles away. Catlow spread out into the valley, later named after him. In 1866, sometime after Camp Kearney was abandoned, Logue Cecil moved its site on Silver Creek to go into the stock business. His brother, Carl, joined him. The Cecils also raised mules. This is one of the few old ranches still operated by a descendant of the original owner. J.C. Pat Cecil is still in the stock business. These stockmen of the Steens were spiritual or physical descendants of the American pioneers who had expanded the boundaries of the United States from the Atlantic to the Pacific through geographical backdoors of through the geographical backdoors of the original 13 colonies. Pioneers strode westward to the Mississippi, following Lewis and Clark and the fur traders to the Pacific. The aid of hardy immigrants from Europe, they settled the mountains and plains in between. It was one of the remarkable feats in history of the human race. This expansion of a people in so short a time. The men and the women who were responsible for it were themselves remarkable. Otherwise, the job would not have been done. The explorers, the fur trappers, the frontiersmen, the entrepreneurs who developed the West, as it was snatched, still bloody, from the hands of dead and or captive Indians, were all of a kind. They were bold and brave, and they would not have ventured into the unknown West. They were bold and brave, or they would not have ventured into the unknown West. They were inventive and resourceful, or they could not have stayed. They were ambitious and wise, or they would not have utilized the resources in the new country. If it had not been for such men and their particular qualities of character, the West might still be a battleground in between Indians and whites, with its land unplowed, its timber decaying, its minerals unmined. In the latter part of this golden age of the West, the men who won respect were those who built the transcontinental railroads, who dug the gold and silver to expand the nation's monetary wealth, who cut the timber to build the farmhouses and towns, who developed the ranches to make use of the most basic resource of all, the soil, that you can't farm on because like 80% of the world is like non-arable land. I don't know. I don't know if that data is correct, but it's like a crazy number, which is why we do so much like livestock. Anyway, back to business. Every man must be judged by the times in which he lived. The men of the 19th century, so 1800s, especially the successful ones, were individuals who planned their own lives, made their own decisions, and rose or fell by their own judgments. Their characteristics were bravery, loyalty, and a shrewd, practical intelligence. These settlers of the Steens were not carbon copies, and unfortunately they left none. Of these cattlemen, more have been written about Peter French than about any of the others. He lived the most dramatic life. He had the most violent death. He was the best cattleman, had the best ranch, and was the most colorful and controversial. It's weird how that works out, like every single time. Anyway, Peter French was born April 30th, 1948, in Callaway County, Missouri, to Marion Bry French and his wife, Mary Burnt. He was christened John William. The Peter came later. In 1850, Brie French moved to California's Colusa County, one of the 27 original counties of that state. By finding Colusa County, With its innumerable Spanish grants, an inhospitable place for a man of small means, he went up the Sacramento Valley to Tehama County. Tehama County is where Vina is. So they grow a bunch of wine there now, and it's a bunch of rangeland and stuff, and orchards. On a knoll in the red soiled area near the Noma Lakey Indian Reservation, he built a substantial two-story home and went into the sheep business, the customary occupation of stockmen in that time and place. The house that stands on that spot is constructed like a fort. Heavy planks stand vertical and are strengthened by others placed diagonally to form solid walls into which shuttered windows and doors are sawed. Containing more lumber than two ordinary houses of the same size would have been protection against the fire of the best rifles of the time. Freight teams and later stages pulled past its door on the way to the settlements and towns in the western range of the mountains. The traffic brought to young John William, aka Peter French, a touch of romance and an active interest in far off places. He was 9 years old before another child was born to the Frenches. Mary arrived in 1858. A much younger son, Bert, was born in 1873, after John William had set out on his own and adopted the name of Peter. Bree French was a well-respected man in the community. When he died, October 7th, 1887, the Red Bluff Sentinel described him as a good neighbor, an upright citizen, and highly esteemed by a large circle of friends. Old-timers whose fathers knew Bree French recall his memory with respect. He was a man who took an interest in and had a part in the affairs of the community. All the Frenches were small. In truth, most men were smaller 100 years ago. Peter had never been described as more than 5 feet 5 or 6 inches by men who knew him. He grew into his teens, a dark youth with black hair, an extremely large head, and piercing black eyes that were later said to look clear through a man. He was quick of movement and of thought. Whatever he gave it his fullest attention and energy. The work on the comparatively small sheep ranch and the affairs of a small farming community did not contain him long. Dun dun dun! Okay, we're gonna leave it there because now I'm sleepy. So I'm gonna finish my stuff and go to bed. Or my hot chocolate. And go put wood on the fire and go to bed. Dun dun dun! It worked. I'm gonna upload these videos. So